They found the wagons at first light, where the trail dipped toward a ribbon of willow and water, canvas still wet with dew, coffee grounds in the pot, cold as the cast iron around it. Two long boxes, the kind you could sleep in if you had to, stood level on their bows, with the tongues bare. The lines were coiled neatly. The horses were gone. If there had been a fight, it hadn't touched the gear. No blood in the dust, no splintered spokes. Whoever left did it fast and without a scramble. The men who came on that camp were from the back half of a wagon train that had strung itself thin across the prairie the day before. They expected to see the Anson brothers up and working. Thomas and Eli were steady travelers who liked to get their fires going early, bread set, harness checked, children watered and fed before the sun rose high enough to make tempers brittle. Instead, the camp felt paused mid-breath. A skillet sat blackened on a flat stone with a ribbon of fat congealed in it. A child's shoe lay under a bench, heel worn, the lace tucked inside like someone had meant to fix it later. They called out and got nothing but the creek's trickle and the muffled stamp of oxen back on the trail. There were tracks, but every inch of prairie had tracks in June. The wind came down off the low hills and erased sharp edges. You could see where horses had milled, where they had been turned hard and driven away at a trot. You could not tell who held their heads. By noon, the train's captain made a choice. He posted 2 men with rifles to hold the sight and sent the rest forward to the hill where a rider could see in 3 directions. The Ansons had been with the train since the crossing at the Platte. They traveled with their wives and 3 children between them, plus a cousin who did most of the cooking and kept the younger ones out from under wheels. The brothers were good with their hands and quick to help a neighbor with a broken pin or a trick axle. When a cow balked at fording, Eli would wade in up to his belt and steady the rope, while Thomas soothed the animal. They had a way with the skittish and the heavy that made other people feel better about their own troubles. The day before they disappeared, a spring storm ran black across the west and teased itself apart. The wind kept falling and rising in odd puffs. The train stretched 2, then 3 miles. Near the end of the afternoon, with the sky cleared and the light turned warm and flat, Thomas told the captain they'd camp a mile short of the usual bend because one of their mares was off her feed and they didn't want to press her. No one argued. The ground by the willows was good, the creek slow enough to draw water without risk, and the grass better than most stretches they'd seen that week. They waved the rest of the train on. The captain said he'd leave a marker near a stand of cottonwoods for them to see in the morning, and they could catch up before noon. The marker stood where he said it would. The Ansons never saw it. By evening, the 2 riflemen posted at the abandoned camp had more company, men returning with the captain and a handful of older boys who could handle chores. The women stayed with the main body and kept it moving to a safer, tighter circle farther up the trail. The searchers worked in widening spirals from the wagons. They found a place where 2 pairs of boots had scuffed the creek bank, but it could have been anyone watering at any time. They found the faint impression of a stockinged foot in damp sand and lost it in 3 steps where the ground turned dry. They found a smear of ash where someone had turned out a coal with a stick. No torn clothing, no shell cases, no drag marks, no horses. Close to dark, a rider came hard out of the west with a story from a prospector who'd been trailing along the hills to keep out of the ruts. He said he'd seen 3 horsemen at dusk the previous evening, moving fast, heads down, leading a string. He hadn't been close enough to tell color or tack and hadn't wanted to get close enough to be counted. He couldn't even swear they'd been driving stolen horses. Everybody on that ground looked like they were stealing from someone in one way or another. The description was as thin as twilight. The captain sent 2 pairs of riders that direction anyway and told them to be back at dawn. They returned with nothing but a line in the earth where hooves had run hard and then angled north. If men had taken the horses, they had taken them like they knew what they were doing. The Ansons had owned 2 good geldings and a mare anyone could manage. In a country where speed and meat meant everything, they were worth more than a wagon full of tools you couldn't sell until a town rose up around you. On the second day, the search pushed out far enough that they risked becoming their own trouble. They cut sign where they could, read what the wind allowed, and called one another by name as they moved through the grass. One of the boys found a kerchief snagged on a sage stem and brought it in like a prize. It turned out to belong to a woman 3 wagons up the train. A tin cup with a nicked rim sat in a fold of the creek bank, where anyone might have set it at any time since the first missionaries came through. The world out there did not give up details easily and took them back fast. They talked over theories by firelight. Some men said it smelled like horse thieves. Others said the brothers might have ridden out after strays before dawn, left the women to start breakfast, and run into trouble that kept them. That didn't explain why the women and children were gone too. A few whispered about people from the hills taking revenge where the trail cut their hunting ground, but nothing at the camp said raid. Nothing had been burned, nothing scattered. Nearly everything of value by weight had been left in place. Whoever left had tidied as if they meant to come back. On the third morning, a single ox wandered in from the east, with a half-broken yoke still hanging, and a patched bell strap cut clean through. He was blown and thirsty, and walked straight for the water. A brand on his shoulder matched a family 2 days ahead, whose animals had spooked in the storm. It told them nothing about the Ansons except that the country did what it wanted, with the careful plans of travelers. Still, a cut strap meant a knife where a knife shouldn't have been. By the time the train reached the next fort, the story was 30 versions long. The officer there wrote it into his log the way he recorded every loss the trail brought: man drowned, child buried, axle snapped, cow gored, 2 men riding out and not back. He sent a scout to look along a dry ravine that had seen traffic that week. The scout came back with 2 pieces of broken quirt and an empty tobacco tin. He thought he saw where horses had bunched and turned, but it might have been the day's heat tricking the eye. He said the same thing every good scout said when asked to turn rumor into fact. The ground is a poor witness when it's this hard. Summer moved on. The train could not spare many more days. They left a small cache of food in a marked pit, and a letter wrapped in oilskin under a cairn, the way you did when you had to choose between staying for hope and moving for the living. If the Ansons stumbled in from the hills, the note told them where to find the train and how far ahead it would be. No one came to read it. In the fall, hunters moving the other direction kicked that little mound apart and took the bacon and the flour, leaving the words behind because they could not eat them. Wagons from later trains found the same place and recognized it immediately. A camp set neat and then left tends to hold its shape. A woman cut a length of canvas and used it to patch her own cover. A man took a broken spoke for kindling. Someone read the oilskin letter and tucked it back where it had been, unwilling to be the one who carried away the last plan the missing had made. Years later, people who had been children in that train said they remembered small things more vividly than the big facts anyone could recite. The way the coffee pot felt heavy with wet grounds when a man emptied it for the last time. The bend in the child's shoelace. The washed board in the creek bank where someone had kneeled to scrub a pot and then set it down as if poised between work and whatever came next. They remembered the captain's voice staying even when the searchers came back one by one with nothing to show. It answered something in them to see an adult hold a line against the emptiness. News drifted back along the trail in the months after. A pair of horses with brands cut or burned turned up far north, sold cheap to a freighter who didn't ask questions he could not afford to answer. Down by another fort, a woman said a family came in on foot, but when pressed, could not place the season or the year. A prospector swore he'd seen a wagon box repurposed as a lean-to near a dry creek bed. When asked where, He pointed west with a thumb blackened by mercury and changed the subject to gold. There was no ending that tied it clean. Men who had felt knives cut hobbles at night insisted it was thieves. Others said the void between forts swallowed people whole in ways that had nothing to do with malice: bad water, a broken leg followed by a day's heat, wrong turn under a sky that hid its sun for 3 mornings. You could step away to check a noise and find yourself only a quarter mile from camp and still lost when the grass closed behind you. Mothers watched their children with a grip that left marks the rest of the way to the mountains. What remains of the Ansons is a patch of ground with a story on it. The trail moved on and packed the dust hard over the few prints that might once have told more. The forts are ruins or parks with signs now, and the creek cuts the same shallow line it always has, bending through willows and pouring into itself until it forgets where it began. On early mornings when the light is low, a person who knows what to look for can still stand where 2 wagons once waited and see how ordinary the scene was. It is the ordinariness that catches in the throat. Everything prepared, everything ready to resume after one small detour, and then nothing but space where a family should be. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.